What is the secret for three guys in ZZ Top? And we've been at this. We being ZZ Top. Music, ZTOP always looked solid from their outside. They were three guys with one sound and a tight setup that never seemed to waver. They kept the same lineup for decades, stayed out off scandals, and let the music do the talking. With the beats, the riffs, and the humor, they built a lasting band that is rock music. But that wasn't the full story. Because behind the scenes, things were far more complicated. There were private struggles, personal losses, and decisions that didn't always sit well within the group. However, now we definitely understand what truly went on behind the scenes of one of the most iconic rock bands of all time. And once you see the full picture, it changes everything you thought you knew about ZZ Top. The making of Billy Gibbons. Before ZZ Top grew their beards and became one of the most iconic blues rock bands in history. Before the worldwide tours, the platinum records, and the unforgettable music videos that came to define MTV's early years, Billy Gibbons was just a boy born into music, raised early live on rhythm, and pulled by a deeper, quieter hunger to create something that felt true. Billy Gibbons was born on December 16, 1949 in the heart of Houston into a family that deeply appreciated music. His father, Frederick Royal Gibbons, was not only a concert pianist, but also a conductor and entertainer, working closely with MGM Studios and producing for stars like Nat King Cole and B.B. King. And this meant that from a young age, Billy was drawn to rhythm in all its forms. What most people don't realize is that before he ever picked up a guitar, Billy was classically trained in percussion, has studied the drums as a child, going through the structured, disciplined world of classical music, learning how timing, tone, and space could build emotion without ever needing lyrics. But the blues for Billy, while the precision of drums was grounding, it wasn't freeing. He wanted something different, and that something arrived in the form of the blues. In particular, Gibbons became a devoted listener of Lightning Hopkins, a fellow Houston native whose stripped-down style embodied the grit of Texas blues. Hopkins' influence on Gibbons was more than stylistic. It was personal. His guitar playing felt like storytelling, and his voice carried the sound of someone who had lived through what he was singing. Through Hopkins, Billy discovered other talents like Muddy Waters, Jimmy Reed, and Howlin' Wolf, and each of them helped build his understanding of what the blues really meant. He studied their styles obsessively and absorbed the feeling behind them. As Gibbons got older, his commitment to the blues only deepened that he explored the sounds of Chicago blues and the Delta blues, as well as local Texas styles. He began to refine his guitar playing, moving from simple imitation to experimentation with tone and texture. He wasn't trying to play fast or flashy. He was chasing something specific, a sound that was authentic, expressive, and rooted in tradition. By the late 1960s, Houston was part of a broader cultural shift. Psychedelic music was taking hold in cities like San Francisco and Austin. In this wave of Moving Sidewalks experimentation, Gibbons formed a band called the Moving Sidewalks, a four-piece psychedelic rock group that included Don Summers on bass, Dan Mitchell on drums, and Tom Moore on keyboards. With the Moving Sidewalks, Gibbons stepped into a very different musical space. The band embraced their acid rock aesthetic, incorporating fuzzed-out guitars, reverb, and lyrical themes that reflected the era's fascination with consciousness and counterculture. The group released a full-length album titled Flash in 1969, as well as several singles that became local hits. Though it was a major departure from his blues roots, Gibbons used this time to expand his technical skills and explore different aspects of songwriting and production. He modified his gear, experimented with feedback, and began to build the unique guitar tone that would later become his signature. It was a period of growth, but also one of tension because the longer he spent immersed in the psychedelic scene, the more he felt disconnected from the emotional simplicity that had first drawn him to music. Still, the experience with the Moving Sidewalks brought him important exposure. In 1968, the band landed Asphalt as the opening act for the Jimi Hendrix Experience during their United States tour. It was during this time that Billy Gibbons and Jimi Hendrix struck up a brief but impactful friendship. Hendrix was famously impressed with Gibbons' playing. In one televised interview, Ricks even named Billy as one of the best up-and-coming guitarists in America. But this praise did distract Gibbons from the inner conflict he was beginning to feel despite the buzz around the band. Gibbons began growing restless. The psychedelic sound no longer satisfied him. It felt overly experimental and increasingly detached from the earthy, unfiltered blues he loved. He missed the rhythm of a slow blues shuffle, and he wanted to bring that sound back, not in form of imitation, but reinvention. By the end of 1969, the Moving Sidewalks had effectively disbanded. Billy was no longer interested in acid rock or abstract lyrics. He had seen the industry up close, opened for legends, and played to big crowds. But what he wanted was something smaller, tighter, and more rooted. He wanted to create a sound that paid tribute to Texas, but didn't get stuck in the past. And so he decided to build a band of his own from scratch. He began searching for talented minds to complete the band. And that search led him to two men and to the creation of ZZ Top, the rise of ZZ Top. In 1969, Billy Gibbons knew exactly what he wanted. That he'd seen the psychedelic scene up close, learned from legends, and come full circle back to the blues. But now forming ZZ Top was ready to build something new, stripped down, hard-hitting, and unmistakably Texan. That same year, he found two like-minded musicians who would complete the picture. Frank Beard, a drummer from Dallas with both jazz finesse and rock edge, was the first to join. Beard had already played in several Texas bands and had a reputation for being tight, versatile, and steady. He brought in Dusty Hill, a bassist and vocalist who had played with Beard in a band called American Blues. Hill's voice had grit, and his playing had groove. More importantly, he understood the kind-of sound Billy was aiming for. With Billy on guitar and lead vocals, Dusty on bass and harmonies, and Frank on drums, the trio came together as ZZ Top. The name was short, sharp, and strange, just like the band itself. From the beginning, the chemistry was clear and the groove was undeniable. This was a band that knew how to do more with less. Their early albums were raw and authentic, filled with Texas blues riffs, simple storytelling, and a laid-back swagger that felt both classic and fresh. ZZ Top's first album dropped in 1971, followed by Rio Grande Mud in 1972. Both records were modest commercial successes, but they helped carve out the band's identity. The songs had character and Billy's tone was thick and greasy. Dusty's harmonies added punch while Frank's drumming kept everything grounded. This wasn't music for the coasts. It was music for the back rows, the bars, and the garages off south. But it was 1973's Tres Hombres that changed everything. The album's lead single, Range, was a breakout hit and a tribute to a real-life Texas brothel built on a hypnotic blues riff and a howling vocal. The song took off in the radio and the album became ZZ Top's first commercial breakthrough. Suddenly, they weren't just a regional act. They were a national band with a distinct, unmistakable sound. By the mid-1970s, ZZ Top was no longer playing small venues. They had entered the arena rock era, and they embraced it. In 1976, the Texas Today launched the Worldwide Texas Tour, one of the most ambitious stage productions of the time. The band performed on a massive Texas-shaped stage complete with live animals, cacti, and a backdrop of desert landscapes. The tour covered more than 90 cities and ran for over a year. It wasn't just about music. It was a full visual experience crafted to leave a lasting impression. But even at this scale, the band remained surprisingly tight. Unlike many rock bands of the 70s, ZZ Top didn't expand their lineup or add extra musicians. The three-piece format stayed intact, and while the image of the band was evolving with longer beards, mirrored sunglasses, and cowboy hats, the core sound was still blues-based rock. Things changed drastically for the band in 1983 with the release of Eliminator, an album that would redefine their career and introduce them to an entirely new generation. The record combined their blues rock roots with new synths, drum machines, and sequences, creating a hybrid sound that felt both classic and futuristic. But it wasn't just the music that transformed the band. It was the visuals. The music Eliminator videos from Eliminator were slick, humorous, and iconic, featuring fast cars, mysterious women, and ZZ Top's now legendary image. Long beards, shades, and an almost cartoon-like coolness. The gamble worked, and Eliminator sold over 10 million copies in the United States alone and turned ZZTOP into a global brand. For the first time, the band had broken through to mainstream pop audiences without abandoning their blues score. But despite the success, behind the scenes, things weren't always as polished as the videos. Inside that machine of humor and sunglasses, their creative friction were moments when the creative sparks turned into real friction. And that tension would eventually bubble to the surface in ways fans didn't always see: friction and controversies. For years, ZZ Top projected an image of unity, cool confidence, and effortless swagger. They were a trio that survived decades of musical evolution, thrived, and sold millions of records while keeping the same lineup intact. But behind the scenes, there were cracks that didn't always show in public. And soon, creative differences, industry pressure, and questions about direction began to chip away at the band's carefully controlled front. The tension started to build in the 1980s just as the band was reaching the height of their commercial